Hello and good evening. My name is Margaden, and I bid you welcome to a sort of thing I haven't done in a while. Yes. Last time I made a proper video for YouTube, that was back in early 2022. And even that was based off a live stream, so I guess that doesn't even count either. So basically, it's been 2 years since I've done a walkthrough or any kind of dedicated YouTube video. And while I've been feeling the itch to get back to it, I've also been slightly intimidated by the prospect. It's, well, being away from it for so long has made me feel like I'm a bit out of practice. But I promised that this would get started in 2023, and I've only got 2 days left, so guess you better hop to it. Now, for a bit of context, as my channel is semi-known for, I focus on a lot of Piranha Bytes games. I've done Gothic 1 and 2 multiple times, Gothic 3 exactly once, and felt like it was about time to take a crack at a walkthrough for Risen, which I did technically do back in the day, but that was before I was really sort of walkthrough focused. While it was based on an experienced playthrough, as in I've played through the game a couple times before that, wasn't really walkthrough focused. That was back when I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. So, for a bit of context, in 2007, Piranha Bytes ended their contract with Joe Wood after the rather disastrous launch of Gothic 3. So Joe Wood retained the rights to Gothic, and Piranha Bytes essentially left their legacy behind and wanted to try and restore a bit of goodwill after what happened with Gothic 3. Risen, as this game is named, was intended as a sort of return to form and back to our roots sort of endeavor. And as we get through the game, I guess we'll discuss how well that went. In early 2023, aka earlier this year, THQ Nordic inexplicably published a port of Risen to the Nintendo Switch for some reason. And what this came with was also an update to the Steam version, with what was surely intended to be some quality of life improvements, including Steam achievements and official gamepad support. However, this version came with some fresh new problems that render it, as far as I'm concerned, pretty much unplayable. Most significantly, there was an immense input delay added to things like parrying and dodging that make combat so much more janky, so much less reliable, that version is pretty much unplayable. So, given that it's been almost a year since any updates to that version of the game, I think that's just how it's going to remain. And luckily, the team that updated it did have one good decision, which was to leave the original version as an option in the public beta settings on the Steam version of the game, which is good because that's what we're going to be playing. Please note that if you're trying to try out both versions, they don't use the same save file structure, and they don't both work with cloud saves the same way. So use a bit of caution when trying them out and figuring out which version you want to go with. As I say, I don't think there's any significant updates to the 2023 version that make the problems it introduces worth it. If Steam achievements really matter that much to you, then, well, you're just going to have to put in with some really terrible combat. So with that said, I'm only showing off the 2009 version, and I won't be making any comparisons between the two because there's not really much to compare. So to head off this question now, for the bulk of this walkthrough, I will be pursuing Mage as my chosen guild. However, when relevant, I do intend to show off some of the build and quest changes with the other two guilds without dedicating an entire series to them. Similar to what I did in Gothic 2, but perhaps fewer episodes dedicated to one guild or another. We'll see how it really plays out in the end. For that reason, I won't be spending a whole lot of learning points in the beginning, which is not really how I recommend you play it, but that's kind of what I'm going to go with, just so I don't have to redo the intro 3 separate times, just to set up the build properly for those alternative guilds. So with all that off the table, we'll discuss more as we go, but for now, without further ado, let's ado.
For longer than humanity remembers, the gods ruled. Humanity served as slaves, but life never remains in balance. Power passed to man, and man banished the gods from the world. But something was released. Something older than man has risen. Given their freedom, humanity must fight for survival. Some cling to safety, others fight. It is a time where a man's choices define him.
Well, it's quite a way to make our entrance. So, right off the boat, we are washed ashore and thrust right into a sort of demi-tutorial. Our first MO is to pretty much pick up everything we can find. As with previous Piranha Bytes games, in pretty much every Piranha Bytes game, inventory is unlimited. So pick up everything you can find. It may save your life.
She's still breathing. Are you okay?
Yeah. But I think I drank half the ocean.
Do you remember much about what happened?
Just that strange man from the Inquisition. And the storm. He sailed us straight into it. Then he vanished. The
What
ship
on
must have
earth was he
capsized and
thinking?
we got washed ashore.
Looks like the poor devils over there weren't as lucky as us.
Any idea where we are?
No. Maybe it's another island.
We should get off this beach. This wreckage could draw looters, and they don't like survivors. We're going to need a weapon. Do you think you could have a look around? See if the tide washed up something we can use? A club, a branch. Anything is better than nothing, right? I'll stay here and keep an eye out for other survivors.
Like how you say anything we can use. We both know that we can't both swing the same club.
I've got something I can use, if we need to fight.
Are you going to maybe equip it? Bit hard to use if you don't. Take it out of your bag and put it on your back. It'll be easier to get to if you need it.
Probably be even easier if I put it on my hip, but this was a day and age where back scabbards were all the rage.
I'm ready. Shall we go?
No time like the present. There must be a path somewhere that leads inland. Let's look for one. Careful. I thought I saw something move in the trees. Get ready. Draw your weapon.
I know my business. I like how it seemed like Piranha Bytes was trying to make no time like the present a catchphrase of sorts, and it just didn't quite catch on. So, we're in the tutorial, and to be clear, this is a bit of a free roam tutorial. In fact, you really don't have to engage with it at all. Reviews back in the day actually complained about how heavy-handed, or not even just reviews, I think everyone in general, complained about how heavy-handed the tutorial was. In particular, the way Sarah is very overbearing. But if you don't want to deal with her, you don't really have to. That said, it's sort of a demi-quest to take her through the tutorial and get to the end of it. Now, if you really want to, you can walk around in the deep waters and collect loot. It is a little bit quicker if you hop about. It saves you from the really slow walking animation, but be wary if you wander out a bit too far, or you see... Now, luckily the game isn't quite as punishing as Gothic 2 was. If you don't recall, at least in the vanilla version of Gothic 2, swimming out too far into the ocean was just an instant death and send you back to the main menu. So, not very forgiving to the explorative types. Now, just to be clear about one thing, I will be doing this as a walkthrough, so it seems only appropriate that I play it on the hardest difficulty available, which is hard. And really, the game isn't all that bad. Now, there are some quirks with combat that we'll get into as we go. But just to kind of get the ball rolling on that, since combat is something you're going to be engaging with a lot, might as well see how it works. So one thing is that most monsters, most animal-type enemies, do this sort of threatening thing that you might be familiar with from ye Gothic days, where they will give you the chance to run away. What's unique about this, maybe not that unique, but you can block any enemy, including monsters, as long as it's melee attacks, even if you don't have a shield. And blocking is pretty generous. Now, there are a lot of enemies later on in particular who can knock your guard aside, and they can be quite dangerous. But at least early on, you can pretty much block anything you want. You may have seen that this bird earlier did a big wind-up move, where he flapped his wings, hopped into the air, and then charged forward. That would break your guard, but individually, they don't really have anything they can do to take advantage of that. In group fights, that would be a bit more devastating, but I would say 80% of the time, you can rely on your block pretty well. That said, you don't necessarily want to get in the habit of using it, because the much more effective, although harder to pull off option, is to dodge. Because enemies don't have much of a telegraph animation in this game, timing your dodges well is a bit difficult. But if you can do it, it's got a few advantages. Namely, one, you may have noticed when you dodge, when you're dodging close to an enemy, it puts you behind them. Basically, you dodge in sort of a semicircle around them. And that is handy, but it brings to light one of the other issues, which is that there's something of an auto-lock going on. Oh, hang on a minute. I stand corrected. You cannot block sting rats. That is a shock to me. I am dumbfounded. Also, I like how they animated, or textured a cloaca for these critters. A little unpleasant. I will be honest, I don't tend to rely on blocks much myself. Oh no. Oh dear. I seem to have a problem with my saves. I'm going to have to resolve that before we go any further. Okay, I apologize for that bit of awkwardness. Remember when I mentioned that switching between the updated version and the 2009 version causes some bugs with your save files? Well, turns out they happened to me again. Just because I had tested the new version previously and forgot to do what you need to do to correct your save files. Anyway, so as I was saying, while the block is fairly dependable, without a shield, apparently some enemies will get through it, and it's not really clear who. But as I said, I don't really tend to rely on the block, at least not a block without a shield. And as you'll see soon, we don't really have to worry about that for long. But when it comes to the dodge, it will put you behind enemies if you're up really close. You'll notice that the angle that we get on them is dramatically different depending on how far away we are. If I'm right up in their face, I get like a 45-degree spin around them. And that can often be enough to get them in a combo where you just hit them in the back and they have trouble getting around you. You can also sort of just rely on strafing. Without holding the block, the auto lock-on doesn't really work that well. You'll notice I don't really focus on them, but as long as you keep the mouse turning, there's not really much they can do. The early-on enemies are not as aggressive as most later, so bear that in mind. But anyway, you really want to rely on dodging more than blocking. That said, there's a shield nearby, which makes blocking much more effective. We will get to that in a moment. Now the thing with dodging is there's two ways to do it. You can either sidestep or backpedal and press the jump button, which in my case is spacebar. That's how I tend to do it, because the alternative is double tapping. And that is very fussy. And for the record, that is what broke with the updated version. The window for double tapping is so wide that you can press the button 5 seconds apart and still end up dodging. It's pretty insane. Anyway, this little Sonic the Hedgehog, turns out he can hit through our blocks, so we want to just whack him. Now you
Must have
notice
been attracted by the smell of the bodies.
how
Must we
rude
have
to
some
interrupt
meat
me.
now? Need a fire or a stove. If I have to eat rat, I'm not eating it raw.
Well, who says I killed it for you?
Pan, we can fry it. Fried meat will help restore our energy, even if it is just rat. We could really do with a few healing parts too. Perhaps there's some that grow around here. Keep a lookout.
So you notice why people really don't like the role she played here. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. What I was about to say before she interrupted is that when it comes to attacking, you'll notice that the attack speed can be pretty fast, but if you were to just mash the attack button, oh my goodness, does it slow down a lot. That's because this game genuinely expects you to time your combos correctly, and if you just button mash, it's going to slow down your animations tremendously. Generally speaking, what you want to do is click at the end of the swing animation. So basically, when it gets down to the lowest angle of the swing, that's when you want to click again. After the third attack, there's a really long window that you can't really do much about. Now, if you want to, you can animation cancel pretty easily with the dodge function. It's not. It doesn't have 100% animation cancel, but it will speed up the recovery of a lot of combat animations. Now, as far as weapons are concerned, there are 3 classes of weapons in the game that you can see. Well, 3 classes of melee weapons that you can see in the character menu. We have sword, axe, and staff. We don't really get any exposure to axes right now, but really all that can be said about axes is they are an inferior version of swords. They effectively have the same animations. They have mostly the same abilities as you level them up. Unfortunately, this game doesn't really give you a preview of the skills that you can get, only the next one. But with axes are two-handed weapons for most of the skill upgrade path, which means you cannot use a shield with them. And they offer no unique advantages over swords that make them worthwhile. Staves, on the other hand, are worse than both of them. They have slightly longer reach. They do have slightly different combat animations, but once again, have no unique effects, no unique skills, no real qualifiers that make them better. But what they do have is never being able to use shields. So all in all, they are pretty much the worst weapon you can use. That said, if you go with the any of the guilds, we'll talk about guilds when we really get to it, so it won't be this video. But if you go with any of the guilds that bring you to the monastery, which are the Inquisition or the Mages, staves are what you're expected to use. And that's a problem, because the sword trainers won't be available to you past, I think, level 7, which is very problematic. That said, axe trainers will always be available. Or the like master axe trainer, the one who can get you up to level 10, will always be available to you. Where's this coming from? Will always be available to you, so you can go that route if you really don't want to use staves. Like I said, once you get them to the point that you can use a shield, they're pretty much the same as swords. Now, their skill paths are a little bit different. For the most part, they end up getting the same abilities in all 3 weapon classes. They just end up with getting them in a different order. Now, there are, because swords have 2 ranks that staves don't have, I kind of forget what staves have instead. So, were I a good walkthrough maker, I would have figured that out before we started. But we'll address that in a future video. As far as this knife I got here, I picked it up on the corpse on the other end of the beach. So you're going to want to do that. Now, there's a path up there. We'll get to that in a minute. But I mentioned that you can find a shield, and you really have to snoop around for it. One thing I do want to give this game credit for, even though it does have the classic billboarding foliage there, it does a good job with foliage density and making things look very overgrown in these parts of the world. So you really do have to look around. That said, it does have the nice effect where the foliage dissipates as the camera gets near it, so it doesn't block your view as you're as you're really getting around. Anyway, in that little alcove there, just up from the big wall on the beach here, you can find your first shield. And as I said, shields are pretty goddamn essential in this game, so you'll never not want to use it. Anyway, I want to show something unique about this enemy up here. We actually did see it, but you probably didn't notice with that vulture that was having a snack on the beach. Enemies such as wolves, vultures, etc. that are eating a corpse, as you can see this one is, have a different AI pattern when you get near them. Now you notice he's being kind of threatening. He's barking and he wants me to leave. Wolves, unlike most enemies, don't really have a stand your ground kind of AI. They will attack on sight as soon as you get within their aggro range. However, because he's defending a kill and he doesn't really want to give it up, they actually have AI programmed where he's going to hold his ground. And it gets a bit funny, because somehow he's less defensive over that than he would be normally. So you can get right up in his face. And now he's going after Sarah because she was closer. And for the record, this is the only way you can get Sarah involved in any combat. She will not fight otherwise, but it turns out she can fist a wolf like nobody's business. You may have also noticed she had some strange grunts when she was taking hits to the back. In a voice that did not sound like her own. That's because this game has a hilarious quirk that I will never understand, where enemies or NPCs use a different soundbite when they take hits from behind. And the soundbites come from Gothic 3 voices, of all things. And I have no idea why that's the case, because every NPC uses their own voice when they're hit normally. But you hit them from behind, and suddenly they're using, I believe it's Steve Blum's voice from the Gothic 3 English version. No idea why hits from behind do that. And it gets kind of hilarious, because not only do female characters use those same voices, even characters that don't have voices, such as skeletons that we fight later on in the game, also grunt like that, only when they're hit from behind. I could not possibly come up with a reason why. Anyway, so as we're going around, we're finding a lot of loot. Now you notice, we were picking up a lot of mussels on the beach. For some reason, the mussels, when they end up in your inventory, look like scallops.
It worked.
And you open them to find pearls, like as if they're oysters. I hope Piranha Bytes never tries to open a seafood restaurant. You wouldn't know what the hell you're getting. Well, we got some deep, dark mystery here.
This cave seems a little eerie. Let's find a different way, please. This doesn't feel right.
Well, if this don't feel right, I don't want to know what right is. You see some little critters in here. Suggest that you keep your HP up at all times, especially if you're playing on hard, because the tide can turn very quickly. Now, if you are familiar with Gothic, but not so familiar with Risen, what you're going to find is that a lot of familiar enemies, familiar styles of enemies, have different names. Now, gnomes ended up being sort of the most iconic enemy of Risen, if you can call a fairly obscure European RPG iconic. But they basically act like you'd expect goblins to act in previous games. Now, the annoying thing is that gnomes, when they group up, can be real assholes, but their AI is actually pretty simple. When they get up to you, they usually attack like once or twice, and you can block it. And they do block themselves, but for some reason they don't tend to keep their guard up. So after you block an attack and you're sure that they're not continuing to press the attack, you can really just lay into them for a 3-hit combo and then put your shield back up. Because for some reason they just will not block all 3 attacks. So that's the easiest way to deal with them. Now, when they're close together, they can start really laying on the attack. And the issue is that even with shields, your angle of block is much more narrow than you would think. So it's very easy for enemies that group up on you to hit you from the sides. And because of the strange auto lock-on feature, it can be very difficult to try and switch your facing, since it's really going to try and keep you faced on the closest enemy to you, which can be very annoying. The other thing that gnomes can do, which I'll try and get them to do up here, is that they have a ranged attack, where they just start throwing garbage at you. And it's quite entertaining. Okay, so we've only got 2 up here. If you back off far enough, should try and throw something. I don't think they're actually going to. I don't think they do it after they've fully drawn their melee weapon. So whichever gnome aggroes on you doesn't tend to use any kind of ranged attack. It's just the ones with them. So anyway, hope you're getting the idea that combat is quite simple. Now, as I said, we do get skills as we go, as we level up. But we're not going to see those for a while for the reason I said before, where I'm going to be holding on to my skill points until the point in time where we need to join a guild, so that I don't have to redo the intro 3 times just to change how my skill points are allocated. Now, if you're familiar with the Gothic games, learning skills in this game is identical to all those. You don't unlock them from a skill tree in a character menu or anything like that. As you level up, you'll get 10 learning points for each level, and you need to use those learning points at teachers to learn skills. One of those skills is mining.
Wish I knew about prospecting.
Or prospecting, as it is. Which we don't have, so we find our first ore vein that we can do nothing with. Now, similar to the mussels that we found on the beach, we just found a purse up on the wall there, which had 25 gold in it. But for some reason, the purse was only valued at 5 gold. We've come out the other side.
Torches? There must be people nearby. Do you think we should head for where the torches are?
Stands to reason. Follow the lights. Oh, big woof. So you see how that wolf did not stand his ground like the other one did. He gave a few barks and came straight at me. Wolves somehow end up being, I would say, one of the easiest enemies to fight in this game. I'll try and show off their AI a bit more later, but they're pretty predictable when they decide to press the attack. As you'll see, we got Sonic the Hedgehog here again, but this time I'm able to block him. Now, a lot of enemies will do anywhere from 1 to 3 attacks in a row, and it can be very difficult to anticipate what kind of combo they're going to do. So I recommend basically waiting for a split second to see if they are continuing their attack before you try and take the advantage, because generally speaking, they will attack faster than you.
Look, it's a house. Looks abandoned. I wonder what happened here.
Something must have driven the occupants away.
Whatever it was, it's certainly not warming me to this place.
Let's take a look around. We might find something useful.
You have a look inside, and I'll keep a watch out here. I'll call if any more of those rats turn up.
Man, you're really hungry for some rats, ain't you? This is where the game loosens the leash a little bit, I guess. Sarah just takes a seat and lets you roam. If you really wanted to, you could just kind of hit the road here, but we'll play along for now. One thing I wanted to discuss, which is the sort of elephant in the room whenever we get into Risen, is what exactly do we consider it to be? Is it a spiritual successor to Gothic, or should it be regarded as a sequel to it? And full disclosure, I was 100% in the spiritual successor camp for pretty much as long as I've been playing it, because it has no direct references to Gothic in-game. However, there are a lot of tangential and incidental references outside of the game, which have really made a pervasive sort of impression in the fandom that Gothic and Risen are intrinsically connected, that this is a direct sequel to Gothic 3. As I said, I refused to believe that for the longest time. However, it was finally brought to my attention somewhat recently that there is actually... I mean, it stands to reason that it started its life as a follow-up to Gothic, but even on the concept that we have now, there is actually direct evidence that it is indeed a sequel, or was conceived as a direct sequel to Gothic. What form that comes in is... I'm just going to talk as we go. We got a key here. This is how we open the chest in here. And we accomplished a lot of quests along the way, but anyway. How it really changed my mind is that Vaana, a friend of mine who has his own YouTube channel, I suggest you check out, and hangs out on Discord, brought to my attention that there is reference material showing that this was fundamentally conceived as a direct follow-up to Gothic 3. There's a lot of concept art, sort of a pseudo-storyboard for Risen directly following Gothic 3, the ending of Gothic 3, where Nameless Hero and Zardos travel into the unknown world, and basically there's a big time skip forward to the intro with the Inquisitor on the boat that we saw in the opening of this game. And obviously the single most direct connection is the theme of humanity banishing the gods and removing their influence from the world in order to stop living under the yoke of the gods, as it were. And that was part of this concept as well. So essentially Risen was, in fact, going to be the same universe as Gothic, just centuries in the future, probably. So there is a video on YouTube by a user called Mielas. I probably didn't pronounce that correctly, but I'll link it in the description below, who played the storyboard sequences in order with closed captioning available for all the German scribbles that are on the concept art, just to really emphasize that that is how this game was conceived. Now, obviously, when Piranha Bytes had to give up the rights to Gothic, they had to abandon those ideas and essentially establish Risen as its own identity. Now, the extent to which they took that is kind of hilarious, given that they didn't even keep the most basic generic enemies in common with Gothic. Like, there aren't even mole rats or giant rats or goblins, for God's sake. They had to rename everything just to make sure they didn't run afoul of copyright infringement on the franchise that they founded. But if you're also interested, Vaana has a post on World of Gothic, the old Gothic forums, which are still kicking around, where he thoroughly investigated the canceled add-on for Gothic 3 that Piranha Bytes was working on. It was going to be what Forsaken Gods essentially filled the void on, which is a bit of a shame that we got that instead, but to be honest, really wasn't much good that could come out of Gothic 3 at that point. Anyway, we've left Sarah starving for long enough.
Doesn't look like there's been anyone in this house for a while. All I found was a locked chest.
Unless you have the key or a talent for picking locks, it's going to stay locked.
I've opened the chest.
Find anything useful?
Just a frying pan. Everything else is junk.
Oh well, at least you can fry up that meat. I could do with a little fried meat right now. You're probably starving too, and we can pretend it's venison.
But it ain't, it's rat. I also like how we say all we found was a frying pan and everything else is junk, but we totally found money in there. Obviously, we ain't gonna tell her that. One thing that will never cease to bug me is what the hell goes wrong with my right foot when we're cooking meat at this campfire.
I think that's cooked.
I think I broke my ankle in that shipwreck, but apparently I just haven't noticed yet. So we cooked up a lot of meat there. Yes, cooking meat means you get more hit points when you eat it. But more importantly, we can feed her and shut her up.
Here's your fried meat.
At least if you don't think about where it came from. Hey, that's not bad.
We should head further inland.
You go on. I really need to rest. That storm took it out of me. I feel exhausted. I'm gonna stay here for a while.
Okay. I'll come back and get you when I know a bit more about this place.
Don't worry about me. Be careful out there. I saw a path to the north. Looked like it led further inland. Maybe there's a village or something up there.
Perhaps. Chapter 1, The Forbidden Island. Now, curiously, that splash screen is really supposed to be the start of Chapter 1, post-prologue. But if we never bring Sarah and we never really finish this tutorial, that splash screen just never happens. Anyway, obviously, there are healing items if you need to restore your health. There are also other ways to restore your health. Recurring from Gothic 3, we have water barrels that you can have a sip on, even though this has just been out in the wild for God knows how long. Probably has a nice mildewy film on top. Just adds to the flavor. Or you can sleep in this very maggoty looking bed. Now, for some reason, there has to be a fade to black screen when you change the time of day, which never happened in any of the previous Gothic games. But neither here nor there. Obviously, at least in the beginning, you're going to want to grab everything you find. Every little bit helps. Got another bite. I can't really seem to bait out the big leaping attack that they do. Oh, there we go. So that would have broken my guard, but as you can see, he doesn't really have any way to follow it up. So, it's really only when they're attacking in groups that you have to worry about getting your guard broken. More importantly, you'll notice that most enemies have a means of dodge themselves, and they have a greater tendency to use it when you're directly in front of them, which is why dodging behind them is the most effective. Because they're not going to really dodge much until they turn and face you. Now, NPCs, human enemies, are much more prolific dodgers than any other enemy type. And they really only become vulnerable when you're directly behind them. So fighting them, which we're not really going to do for a little while, is a whole challenge in sort of an intuition you need to develop on all their own. Well, with just about any enemy, getting behind it really is the best way to go. And one thing to note about the dodge, if you're used to playing more recent action games that have a dodge function, you may expect there to be invincibility frames on the dodge, but there are not, as far as I can tell in this game. So dodging is purely for positioning. And with enemies that have really big, wide area swings, that can be really troublesome. So we have grave moths here. They are obviously the non-copyright infringing bloodflies of this game. The vultures, of course, would be the scavengers. Sting rats would be mole rats or giant rats. What else have we gone into? Wolves are wolves. I guess that's public domain enough for them. And here we have the first ruin. The ruins what have risen. If we take a look down below, I suggest you have torches on your hotbar. Very handy. One thing to note is that hotbar slots 1 and 2 are dedicated to a melee weapon and a ranged weapon. Now, luckily, the shield just sits on top of the melee weapon, so you don't have to worry about that with its own hotkey, the way you did in Gothic 3. But, yeah, those are committed. It's a bit of a throwback to Gothic 1 and 2, where those are the dedicated slots for those. Now, you can hear critters down below. There's a very small ruin, just to kind of whet your appetite for the types that we will be exploring more and more as the game goes on. There's a bit of a gimmick to this one, as there tends to be with most of them. See, there's a gate there, and we have no visible means of opening it. That's because the only way down there is this very obvious trapdoor in the middle. Now, if you had a ranged weapon... Oh, God. Yeah, for the record, the grave moths are the most annoying enemy in the game. Not mechanically, not in fights, but by virtue of their incredibly annoying sounds. Now this part's a bit annoying, because in order to drop down here, we have to take a hard landing, which leaves us open to getting stabbed in the back by this thing. So that's a bit irritating. Also, I didn't really get to bring my torch down here, but, well, I will light balance this if I have to. Well, we have some loot. One thing I do want to bitch and moan about, as I tend to do, is this game and so many others really love to make ruins that don't seem to serve any function other than being a dungeon. Like, what? Somebody built this ruin to serve a purpose. And we're gonna see so many other ruins. Like, some are obviously temples, places of worship, that all makes sense. But you never see ruins of an ancient culture that were clearly, like, where they slept, where they ate, where they went to the bathroom, where they had shops, that kind of thing. They're always ruins for the sake of ruins, like for the sake of dungeons. They never seem to have a function in any kind of society that would have actually used them. Anywho. Now the issue with groups of enemies is that it can be very hard to separate them because they have group aggro. So you notice that even though only one of them started attacking me, the other one was further away. Because one of them went into combat, into attack mode, and not threaten mode, they both came after me. Now, later on, we'll see groups up to like 5 or 6 of these damn things, and that can be really dangerous. But, as I said before, most enemies attack between 1 and 3 times. That can be very frustrating to deal with that, because they're really inconsistent about it, and they don't have much of a telegraph. Now, that said, eventually you kind of get an intuition when they're ready to attack, and you can almost bait it, because they tend to attack slightly less often if you have your guard up. So you can almost anticipate it and just preemptively dodge, because that alone seems to bait out an attack. I noticed a curious bug where, for some reason, it's giving me a combat tutorial for a counter parry every time I draw my weapon. I don't have that ability yet, so I shouldn't be getting that combat tutorial. But that is a strange bug that happens when you have a torch in your hand and draw your weapon. Happens every time. But it doesn't happen if you didn't have a torch to start with. Anyway, the thing about torches, you cannot put them away. So once you've lit them, you've committed. All you can do is leave it behind. Okay. Well, we see signs of life. Got a house here. A lit torch in front. Perhaps we're getting somewhere.
Hey, you there. What are you doing here?
Whoa, keep calm. I'm no threat.
I'm the one with the sword, and so I'll decide that.
I got the same sword,
Let's
buddy.
try again. What are you doing here?
I don't exactly know where I am.
Right now, you're on the wrong end of my sword. Things becoming any clearer yet?
The boat I was on sank. I landed on the beach.
So, one of the crew survived the storms, eh? We'd heard it was just the Inquisitor. You don't look like you're with the Inquisition.
I was a stowaway.
On an Inquisition ship? You're lucky they didn't catch you and throw you overboard, or worse, turn you into one of them. Someone or something is looking out for you. And I ain't gonna mess with that. But don't stretch your luck. The White Robes catch you here, you'll be in trouble. If you want my advice, then find yourself a good weapon. You won't get far without one. There may be something around here. Have a look. Come back to me when you've found something.
Okay, you're just threatening our life, and then you suggest we arm ourselves. Curious note, just one of those oddities that I pick up on, having played these games 1,000 times. This is the only case, I think, in any Piranha Bytes game built on this engine, where an NPC will draw a weapon in dialogue. That said, it never happened very often in Gothic 1 or 2, but it could happen. In fact, you could do it yourself. But that's the only case of an NPC having a weapon drawn in dialogue. in any of the Genome Engine games, which are Gothic 3 all the way through to Elex 2. Just, you know, a little oddity. Now, one thing about the inventory, it's very ugly. First of all, don't really care for the size of it. You know, in this high definition day and age, it'd be nice to expand it a little bit, get some more room on it. But you can narrow it down to categories of items, obviously. But in this grid format, especially with these sort of stylized icons for everything, these aren't exactly how these items look in the world. Well, it's a step up from Gothic 3, where you could barely distinguish anything, but I would say still a step back from Gothic 2. But it be how it is. We got ourselves an improved weapon. It's not really much improved, but improved is improved. Hey, buddy, you got one of those to share?
I found this sword.
Good. I hope you know how to use it.
Stick 'em with a pointy end.
What can you tell me about this place?
What do you want to know?
Looks like I'm going to be stuck here for a while. Anywhere I can get some food or pick up some gold?
Ha! Not round here, at any rate. I just asked for this post so I can watch the storms. Amazing things when they blow past. Strange how they never come inland. A few weeks ago I would have sent you to Harbour Town, but not anymore.
Why not?
It's full of Inquisition. Protecting those ruins and recruiting for the damn White Robe cult at the monastery. I'm with the Don myself. We're the only ones who are still free. Living in a camp in the middle of a swamp. But freedom's freedom. I'd head to the swamp, see if the Don will take you in, or try your luck in Harbour Town. Just stay away from the monastery.
Man, you really make freedom sound oh so sweet. Living in a swamp, trying to dodge the oppressive long arm of the Inquisition.
So is Harbour Town safe? What are the Inquisition doing there?
Not much at the moment. There are still some of our boys in there. They might help you out. And that White Robe lot probably won't bother you too much. I can show you the way, but believe me, you'd be better off at our camp.
Can you show me the way to Harbour Town?
Sure. Follow me.
Now just be aware, when he says he's going to show you the places, he doesn't actually take you very far, so don't worry about him trying to run you all the way to town. Now, one thing we did pick up in there that I didn't really mention was we have a map, but you'll notice it's fairly incomplete. But it does show you the major pathways between the major landmarks. So that is quite handy. Now bear in mind, once you get out here, we're not really dealing with...
See that farm down in the valley?
I see it.
Some of the Inquisition's minions work down there. Novices, they call them. They're apprentices to the mages in the monastery. Talk to them. They'll help you get to Harbour Town. But watch you don't find yourself accidentally recruited. You get recruited, there'll be no welcome for you at the Don's camp.
Thanks. I can take it from here.
I'm sure you can. Good luck. See you around.
Now don't fret. That's not the last we can get from him. But what I was about to say is, bear in mind, essentially once you reach this area, you're not dealing with really low level enemies anymore. Pretty sure this is already a higher rank wolf. Nope, it is not. Okay. Disregard. Anyway, one additional combat tip I want you to bear in mind is that successive melee attacks in a combo do more damage. So your first attack, it's hard to notice against these low-level enemies, but your first attack does not do much. Your second attack does a little bit more, and the third hit does all the damage. Like, I would say more than twice as much as the first hit does. However, getting to land that third hit is often very tricky, so don't become obsessed with the idea that you have to land all 3 hits. You know, you may need to play defensively more often than not. Anyway, a little tip. If you just climb up this little butte here, whatever this is called, and find your first bow of the game. Not the most useful thing, but there is a sort of unique consideration with a bow that can be very handy for exploring. Same is true if you have any kind of targeted magic spell scrolls or anything like that. But you'll notice that even from a distance, Well, first of all, don't have weapons drawn near NPCs. They tend to take that as a threat. But you notice if you mouse over any living entity, you can see their name. It's sort of an advanced warning system, which is very helpful. So as you're exploring, I kind of suggest scanning the horizon with your bow like that, just to make sure you're appraised of enemies that you might stumble onto obliviously. So he started to show us the way to Harbor Town. We can bear that in mind, but that's not somewhere I plan on going anytime soon. So that little farmstead he showed us down there, we will visit that in a future episode. Won't be too long, but we aren't getting to it now.
You mentioned a monastery. What happens there?
The last place you want to be. It's where the Inquisition train their recruits. Brainwash them. Stay well away from there.
What's the Don got to offer me?
Meat, beer, a job. He might even train you as a fighter. You got a sword, after all. Most they'll let you have up at the monastery is a staff. Just a big stick. That's not a real weapon.
Well, it is if you talk softly, but carry a big stick.
There's a girl came ashore with me. She's in an abandoned house to the south.
South? Must be the old shipwrecker's house. I'll head that way later. If she's there, I'll take her somewhere safe.
I'd like to point out that we have given this man a lot of trust, but he's also given a lot to us, so I guess we're mutually too naive to be dangerous.
All right, show me the way to your camp.
Good man. Follow me.
You know, one question we should have asked, can the Don offer us shoes? That would be nice.
Look to the north. You see the ruins sticking out of the ground?
Yeah, I've seen ones like that before.
Well, the White Robes set up a camp there. If you're smart, you won't be seen up there. Otherwise, you'll be snatched up and taken to the monastery. Do you want to be a slave or a free man?
You're really hammering this home, aren't you?
Sorry. You're right, you're your own man. Free to do what you like. Come on. It isn't much further.
I'd like to point out that we are well within their eyesight from here. But take his advice to heart. If you get within, I would say, spitting range of those white robed lot up there, they will immediately attack you. They won't kill you, but if they knock you down, well, we'll discuss what comes of that later.
If you follow the path north, you'll come to our camp. And watch out for the hunters. The lazy beggars are always trying to get others to do their work for them.
Thanks for your help.
You've been through enough. You deserve a bit of kindness. I'm sure I'll see you around. Good luck.
Well, thank you kindly, sir. So for this moment, I would suggest you mainly stick to the path. You can wander off if you like, but, well, make prolific use of the save function if you're going to do that. Things can get very dangerous when you wander off the beaten path for now. If we were to take his advice, we head straight down into the swamp. I do not mean to draw the bow. Although, we'll at least show you how it works. Now, as far as bows, there are not any unique skills with bows, or crossbows for that matter. The only difference is that their effective range and their draw speed is improved as you rank up. Alright, so we are not dealing with juvenile or hungry class enemies at this point. These sting rats can wreck you to pieces in no time flat, so be a little more defensive. That said, since they have no means of block and their dodge is pretty ineffective, laying the smackdown is not that hard. But one trick that I kind of follow when fighting enemies, especially monsters, is that when they... Usually after they attack, they'll kind of sit still for a minute and let you back off. But then when they charge back forward, you'll see as soon as he's closed the distance, he immediately attacks. So once you get used to that, you can kind of come to anticipate it and use that as your cue to dodge. Now, unfortunately, their audio cue for when they're attacking is a little unreliable. But, like I said, as soon as they get within attacking range, they're going to attack immediately. And that is your time to dodge. that is the general rule of thumb I follow with combat. Now, I tried to think of all my combat tips just to get them out of the way early, since combat is pretty much the first major mechanic you're really going to encounter. But there's going to be a lot more that I recall as we go. There's obviously more to discuss as we start getting skills. So I'll really have to explain those as they become relevant. For now, well, I don't really want to get into the deep, thick, I don't really want to get into the thick of it with the Don's camp, which is just on the horizon there. But we'll at least greet the doorman, I suppose, before this episode ends.
Hey, you. Where do you think you're going?
I'm just taking a look around.
Just messing. Have to make my own entertainment. Gets a bit boring round here. Apart from the rotworms eating people. I'd stay on the walkway and not go too far out into the swamp. Believe me, being eaten by those creatures is not the way a man should go. Hang on, I think I've got a map somewhere you can have. Although by the looks of you, you could do with a better weapon.
Everyone keeps saying I need a better weapon. What's wrong with the weapons I got? So judgmental. So what he's given us is not the world map that we already have. He's given us... Whoops. Okay, so that's an annoying quirk of the map. It does not disable your cursor. It does not disable any interaction with the world. It just sits over the screen, and the cursor floats over it, so quite annoying. But he's given us a map of the bandit camp, which is not the most helpful thing. But you can see where the patches of dry land are. You can see where the general buildings are. Honestly, the camp is so small that I really don't feel like you need this, but it's there if you feel like you need it.
Where can I get a better weapon?
Depends on what you're after. Some swear by a good blade. Others prefer the heft of an axe. I'm a hunter, so I favour a bow and arrow. I've got a couple of nice specimens here, actually. For the right price, I'm sure I could part with one or two.
Well, who needs more than one bow?
What do you hunt in the swamp?
Less and less. There are only a few beasties. They may look unappetizing, but you'd be surprised what our cook can do. About the only thing left big enough to feed us all is this large worm over to the west. But he's a big fella. I really need help to take him down. Probably a bit of help to keep him down after I've eaten him too.
How about I help you hunt this worm?
Oh, that's good of you. Tell you what, if we kill that thing together, I'll give you 30 gold. I hope you're well prepared. Don't want your death on my conscience.
I'm sure that's the least of your problem, sir.
I'm new around here. Got swept in with the tide. What can you tell me about this place?
Ah, I see. Well, then there are a few things you should know. This whole swamp area, from here to the temple in the north, it's run by Don Esteban, our leader. I wouldn't mess with him if I were you. He's got some fighters working for him that'd break your jaw as happy as look at you.
What can you tell me about the temple?
Came up from the ground about the time these storms started, and all these beasts came out of it. Never seen the like before. Indescribable they are. Our fighters soon sorted them out. I doubt there's much still alive in there. Well, apart from the Don. He's moved into the temple now. Don't see him very often. No one really knows what he's doing in there. Me, I say hunt, kill, and don't ask too many questions.
That's right, just following orders.
So, you haven't always been here in the swamp?
Nah, we used to have the whole of Harbour Town until the Inquisition came. All their magic and robes and stuff. They pushed us out here. Between you and me, I think the Don's pride took a bit of a knock. He hasn't been the same since. Most folks hate this place, but I like the fresh air. New things to hunt. Always felt too cooped up in town.
I think the air's a little fresher up out of the swamp, but hey. I see, take what you can get.
What are rotworms?
They can't really be described. Indescribable they are.
Are they?
They're like giant, rotting worms. You can ask Ricardo in the camp.
And they sound pretty self-descriptive.
What else can you tell me about the Inquisition?
Same as everyone else, really. Don't get too close to them, or you'll find yourself dragged off to that monastery. They're not right in the head. I think they do something to them up there. I'm keeping well away. I advise you to do the same.
So, what's your boss doing in the temple?
I couldn't say for sure, but he's become very keen on collecting gold at the moment. He's got diggers working these ruins, and he always gives them a share. He's good like that. I think maybe he's planning on trying to take back Harbour Town. Gold commands a lot of power around here. Maybe even more than the Inquisition with their damn cult.
Let's trade.
We'll hunt your worm in a second, sir. Now, as I showed, we've got our own short bow here. It'll be the only bow that you can use from him right now. We need to level up stats in order to equip better weapons. This sword and short bow are pretty much the only two weapons we are going to be able to use for the near future until we start pumping strength or dexterity, depending on what needs what. Now, when it comes to merchants, they have a bottomless pool of gold that they can tap into if you're selling them things, which is nice. Well, a curious thing that this game did and no other game did, and for good reason, is that for some reason things can have a value of fractional gold. You can't take a fraction of gold. You can't, like, have a fraction of gold. So, basically, if you don't have a nice whole number here, you're losing out on whatever the difference is. Which is a bit strange. But if you just want to avoid losing out on anything, well, we'll just take 2 of these back, and they'll put us at a nice, even 61. As far as stuff like animal trophies, pearls, jewels, that kind of thing, I would say you want to hang on to these things. We don't need brooms or saws or tools like that. If you want to make weapons, if you want to cook stuff, then you need to keep stuff like hammers, frying pans, goldsmith tongs or whatever. Stuff like that, you'll kind of come to understand what you need to keep. But if you're going to become a mage or really use scrolls of any kind later in the game, that's where these animal trophies really become the most applicable. But for now, they're not super necessary. And I would say we never really need as many as we can get. So for now, I'm going to sell all this stuff. You don't want to sell lockpicks. They are a very useful item. We can't actually use them yet. Lockpicking is another skill we have to unlock. But yeah, we want as much money as we can get for now. Things get very expensive early on in the game.
Come on, let's go kill this rot worm.
That's the spirit? Right. Ready your weapon and stay close to me.
Let's have one nice big kill before we call it a night.
Get in there!
I'm in there. Now, I don't actually suggest you participate in this fight too much, because this thing is real dangerous. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that the way aggro works in this game, when you have multiple combatants, is very different to how it worked in Gothic 1, 2, or 3. Because it seems much more proximity focused rather than who's done the most damage or who's done the most recent hits. In Gothic 3, you could kind of cheese it, because as long as you didn't hit the enemy twice in a row without somebody else hitting them in between, you would never directly pull their aggro. This one is a little bit less reliable. Another thing to bear in mind, which is very frustrating, is that this game has no protection against friendly fire.
That's how it's done.
So I could have very easily hit Doug there with the way he kept running in front of my swings. Unless you have essentially a party going, where a character is either following you or leading you. Well, following you, actually, because he was leading me. It can be very easy to accidentally hit them in melee combat, so be very careful of that. Another thing to bear in mind, I made sure to get the last hit, the killing blow on that monster, because if another NPC kills them, again, unless they're sort of in a party, then you don't get the XP for it. I don't remember if Doug's was that case, but just bear that in mind. If you're trying to use NPCs to help you out in fights, generally speaking, you want to be the one to get the killing blow to make sure you get the XP.
See, that's what being a hunter is all about. The The thrill of the hunt, the buzz of the kill. Ah, that's made my week, that has.
I've killed that worm. You don't need to worry about it.
One less worm is no bad thing. Here, have 30 gold for your trouble. Hey, if you're going to the camp, can you take this raw meat with you? They always need food there. Just give it to Rachel, the cook. I'm gonna stay here, see if I can spot my next challenge.
Now, this game does have Gothic 3 syndrome, where getting to a quest location and then solving the quest tend to be treated as two separate quests. That's why we see that weird quirk, where he brings us out here and he boasts about the kill afterwards, but then we tell him that we killed it. A bit strange, that. That's kind of how they do. One of the plants you're going to find around here is this brugleweed. I just picked up a few specimens of. I suggest you pick up as much of that as you can find. I guess it's just called weed. Pick up as much of that as you can find. It's actually fairly valuable this early on. But for now, I think that's where we're going to wrap it up. For this inaugural episode, I didn't really have a hard stop in mind, but we're about an hour in. Hope you enjoyed the video. The format may change as we go on. I'm more or less going to try and do this the same way as I did my Gothic 2 walkthrough, where it's very in-depth, kind of slow and deliberate, and as thorough as I can possibly be, but without really a whole script written out to follow. So it's going to be a bit more, say, old-school, long-play, casually formatted, but with notes on hand of everything I want to cover so that, you know, things are done in a somewhat structured, but not rigidly scripted way. If you think you'll enjoy that, then please stick around. Otherwise, have yourselves a lovely New Year's, and see you in 2024. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and good night.